Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is our January 15th, 2025 business meeting for the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners. This is a special meeting for us because it is the first in our new commission chambers. Those of you who are joining us today will notice that we do not yet have the padding on the benches, but I swear it's coming, and also some acoustic panels that'll be on the back wall. So other than that, this is a new space for us, and we're very excited to have it. And I hope that we'll do kind of a little bit more of a celebration of that sometime, in the next couple meetings to celebrate some of the folks who have helped to bring this to us. This is also a very important meeting in that this is the first time we are joined as a 5-person commission by Commissioner Anderson and Commissioner Dorsey. So we're very much welcome to the two of you, and thank you for being with us. And we are jumping in. So this evening, we have for our agenda, which feel free, there are copies of the agenda back by the doors if anyone would like to get a paper copy. And then all of our formal packet is also available online. This evening, we will have a consent agenda followed by general public comment and then our regular agenda. We do have some rules for public comment and for our meetings at large. So we do say that when we have public comment, that each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes. Individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers, and all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. We do also work to maintain the decorum of our meeting by prohibiting comments that are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent, fighting words, slander, or speech that invades the privacy of individuals, unreasonably loud, disruptive, or repetitive, or that interrupt or substantially interfere with the board's ability to conduct county business. We do reserve the right to mute or remove speakers who violate these public comment rules. When we do have public comment, we'd ask for your full name and address for our meeting minutes and that you'd address your comments to the commission. Please do know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not necessarily reflect the views of Douglas County government, but we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comment on the spot, but if you leave specific questions with county staff and your contact information, we'd like to get those answered. After general public comment, we have our regular agenda. And this is our practice for regular agenda items, is that we hear from staff or an applicant, and then we have questions from the commissioners to that staff or the applicant. At that point, we turn to public comment and open that item up for people to make comments on that. When we've exhausted public comment, we bring it back to the commission. And at that point, we start to have our own conversations and deliberations. We may have follow-up questions also. Lastly, a recording of the meeting will be available on our county's YouTube page and website. So with that, commissioners, we do have a consent agenda of 7 items. And I'll first ask commissioners, are there any items on the consent agenda that you would like to pull for further conversation? No. Okay, seeing none at this time. Is there any member of the public who has an item from the consent agenda that you would like to pull for further conversation? Seeing no one in the room. Sarah, do we have any hands raised online? Okay, thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Motion to approve items 1 through 7 on the consent agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. This brings us to general public comment. Do we have anyone first in the room who would like to give general public comment this evening? Seeing none here in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone with a hand raised online? Okay, thank you. And for that, we're closing general public comment and we begin our regular agenda. This evening, we do have 2 related conditional use permits, and I believe we'll hear from Mary Miller to start us off with that. Thank you, Mary.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm Mary Miller, a city county planner, and I do have the 2 CUPs that I'm going to present together, but I've been asked to kind of provide a conditional use permit overview. There's been some changes now that we're a 5-party commission, so there's some changes overall, and to kind of just give you some background on CUPs. Oops. I'm trying to do that. Or that. A conditional use is a discretionary use. So it's a use that you can approve or deny, or you can approve it with conditions. It's a use that we might see as being desired in the community. Event centers or something in the rural area that are desired, but sometimes they might not be appropriate due to the amount of noise, traffic, or activity based on their location. And sometimes there are necessary uses like a substation or a cell tower, which could also have impacts. And that's why they're treated as conditional uses. In the zoning regulations, in each zoning district, there's a set of uses that it's considered they may be acceptable in that district, or they may have impacts that would make them not acceptable depending upon where they're located. And so those require approval of a conditional use permit. I keep doing that and I'm sorry. I'm going to learn to just turn my mouse. And so in zoning, if you have a property that's rezoned, every use that's allowed with the site plan is an allowed use. You don't have the discretionary ability and you can't apply the conditions. So I kind of wanted to highlight some of the measures that make a conditional use kind of special. First off, like I said, it's discretionary. You can add conditions if there's a use that you think would be impactful because it'll have too late of hours. For instance, with quarries, we always set hours on blasting because that's going to have an impact. It's necessary, but there's always hours limiting it. So you can set conditions to make it more acceptable. And then one of the conditions that's usually set is a time limit. How long can the CUP last? We have some that don't have time limits. We have a bed and breakfast in the rural area that's so low impact, it doesn't have a time limit. It can continue on. Most of them have like a 10-year time limit. And that allows us to look at it again when the development has occurred in the area to make sure it's still compliant or still compatible. And some have less. So there's no requirement, there's regulations to have a time limit or what the time limit should be. That's kind of up to you. And a final step on the CUP, what makes them kind of powerful is that the county commission can suspend, amend, or rescind a CUP if the conditions are not complied with. If the conditions of the CUP or the county code or state or federal laws are not complied with, they can come back to you to be rescinded. I think there's only been 2 in the time that I've been a planner that have come back. One was a quarry that the previous operator had put out of compliance and the new operator wasn't aware. So that came back to the commission and they let it continue, but they had a consent decree with timelines. Then they required it to be brought back into compliance. The other one was a mini storage facility. It had been approved, but 5 years had passed. And when it was time for zoning and codes to do their compliance review, nothing had been built. And so they brought it back and that was rescinded because obviously it wasn't in compliance with the plan. So there's a very rare, but it's a powerful enforcement tool because they know that that's a final step. And zoning and codes is usually able to work with the CUPs. They do have usually 5-year reviews where they keep reviewing them to make sure they are compliant. And so that's how they're able to keep track of those. So the process of a conditional use permit, the very first thing is we have a pre-application meeting. Staff meets with them. This is for the benefit of the applicant. And the point is we want to look at what they're proposing and see would it comply with the review criteria and our regulations. Could staff support it? If not, sometimes they change their plans so that we could support it. Sometimes they just drop the idea. So you won't see very many CUPs before you with a staff recommendation for denial. It happens sometimes. They just want to move ahead. You may see some that have a planning commission recommendation for denial. And I'll tell you in a moment how if you want to vote contrary to the planning commission, what type of vote is required. But that's the main purpose of the pre-application meeting. Once they submit an application, it's sent to our review committee for review. And that typically includes the zoning and codes office, the county engineer, the public works office, townships, water districts, and then anyone else, depending upon what it is. We have other agencies like KDHE, KDOT, depending on what it is. We get the review comments, we give those to the applicant. They can make changes to the plans or they can respond to the comments. And then if needed, we send out another comment letter. But when the comments have been substantially addressed, then we write the staff report with staff's recommendation and it goes to the planning commission. And the planning commission holds a public hearing. And a public hearing is different than a public meeting. And I don't know all the variances, but I know that a public meeting is when you just take public comments. And the planning commission holds a public meeting on every item that comes before it. Plats, text amendments, everything. But they only hold public hearings on CUPs and rezonings. And the state statutes have some specific rules about items that have public hearings. One is notification. We have to provide notice to property owners within 1,000 feet, written letters, 20 days before the planning commission meeting. And in our zoning regulations, or your zoning regulations, when they were adopted, that was strengthened. The zoning notification and CUP notification range was increased to half a mile rather than 1,000 feet. And also the yellow signs that you see, the development signs, those have to be posted too, in case there's residents that aren't property owners. So they're aware of what's happening. So the notice has to happen. And then there's also a provision for a protest petition with those two items, CUPs and rezonings. If property owners are upset with an item, they can file a protest petition. It has to be filed after the planning commission's action. And if it's a valid protest petition, and that would be certified by the county clerk's office, if it's valid, it would require a supermajority vote of the commission. And when they were 3 commissioners, that was just a unanimous vote. But now that there's 5, it would be a 4 out of 5 vote. So in order to vote something that has a protest petition upon it, it would take 4 votes. So when the planning commission, they'll take staff's recommendation into account, they'll take that information at the public hearing, their own expertise, other information, and they'll make their recommendation to you. They can also move to defer it, and they can return it to staff for more information, or they can refer it to the applicant if they don't feel they've provided enough information or had enough neighborhood outreach. They can also recommend denial, they can recommend approval, or they can recommend approval with revised conditions. And the CUPs before you today, the last option is what the planning commission did. They recommend approval, but they did revise the conditions. Then when it gets to you, you have the same range of options. You can defer it. You also have the option to return it to the planning commission if you want them to reconsider it. That's especially important if you're voting contrary to the planning commission's recommendation, or you can vote to deny or approve with revised conditions. You're also able to revise the conditions. I'm not going to learn that right away. And so I mentioned there are 2 special votes. One is that protest petition. It requires 4 out of 5. And the other is if you vote contrary to planning commission recommendation, that takes a 2/3 vote, which used to just be a simple majority, but now it requires 4 votes. So if the planning commission would vote to deny it, recommend denial, but you want to vote to approve, you would have to have 4 votes. And if you don't have 4 votes, then you can return that back to the planning commission. And in the meeting, you would mention the reasons you want them to reconsider it, and that would be in the video. And then they would make a new recommendation. It could be the same one, or they could change it. When you get it back, then you only have to do a majority vote. But that gives the planning commission time to reconsider the recommendation. I apologize. And then the next steps, we have the publication of the resolution, plans are released. They'll stay in our office, the planning office, until the conditions of approval are met, and then they're released to zoning and codes. Zoning and codes has an actual permit for the conditional use permit they issue to the applicant. Building permits are issued when building plans have been submitted and approved. And sometimes there's conditions of approval that are tied to building permits. So once everything is done, they can have their building permits. And the final step is a certificate of occupancy or certificate of completion. And at that point, the use can commence. So there's conditions of approval that I've mentioned that are tied to the release of the plans or the release of the building permits. There's also conditions and restrictions of use. And these go for with the use for the whole life of the CUP. So these are just examples of some that have been tied to them, like hours of operation, types of uses, the time frame, truck routes. That's always a big item because we want to keep, there's heavy trucks, keep them off the small roads. Annual studies are often required. We have a shooting range that has to do a soil and water test every year to make sure that the lead content isn't getting too high. Signage or fencing, it could be any number of conditions, but those run for the life of the CUP. So as far as the 2 CUPs before you today, we have one for a landfill and one for a borrow pit. The formal name is mining and excavation or extraction of natural resources. This covers quarries, sand pits, and also borrow pits. A borrow pit is much smaller. They're just taking clay and soil materials, and that would be used to build up the land for the K10 expansion. The landfill is the deposition of waste materials. It doesn't involve taking any materials away from the property. So they're 2 separate uses, even though they're very similar. The borrow pit is going to include a landfill activity at the end because that'll be part of the reclamation plan. They're going to be bringing materials in, but it's included in the overall borrow pit CUP. And before I get started, I know the planning commission's quite a bit of time talking about East 875 Road. It was, if you watch the video, they did talk about it quite a bit. Most of their concern was who would maintain this road when this whole project is over. And that's not really in the scope of the CUP. For the scope of the CUP, it's going to be built by KDOT. It's in KDOT right of way. The King's Construction is a contract purchaser of the property. They'll be operating the borrow pit and the landfill, and they'll maintain the road and all the other roads. There aren't too many other roads in this truck route because they're so close to the city limits, but they'll maintain those roads and keep them in good state, and they'll leave them as good a condition as they were when they started. And that's their contract with KDOT. Once the whole project is finished, KDOT said they would turn the road over to the appropriate governing body. So if the city of Lawrence has grown, that could be 8 or 10 years from now. If that has been annexed, it would be turned over to the city of Lawrence. If not, it would be turned over to the county or the township. And then the maintenance would be decided from that point. So the 2 CUPs, I'll start talking about the landfill first. KDHE regulates landfills in Kansas. We have a number of different types of landfills. The construction and demolition landfill is one that are clean rubble landfills are kind of a subset. And construction and demolition landfills include all materials yet when you have construction, demolition of a project. For instance, roofing materials, flooring materials, wood, appliances, and then clean rubble, which is a very limited subset. That's when you have a clean rubble landfill, it's very limited. It can only have concrete products. It includes reinforcing steel, asphalt, pavement, brick, rock, and uncontaminated soil. And so based on the information that KDHE has, they've agreed this would be a clean rubble landfill. And KDHE notes the stable nature of the materials in a clean rubble means it may be disposed of with construction and demolition waste, or it may be disposed of separately at a clean rubble site. State statutes do not require a solid waste permit for operation of a site that accepts only clean rubble. So no KDHE permit is required. They note that communities can require permits, and we do require a CUP because it could still have external impacts. It's going to have traffic and it's going to have activity. So we still require the permits for clean rubble. I'm just showing that map again that I had for the roads. This shows the entire K10 project that's going to occur with this phase. It's going to go from Iowa. It'll be expanded to 4 lanes just north of the 6th Street intersection. The next phase, whenever they get to it, will go on to I-70. But this is the part that's going to be done with this project. The subject property is shown in red, and then the truck route is the area that's shown in yellow. So this really does minimize the amount of rural roads that need to be used for this project. And this kind of shows how the site uses would be developed on the site. The yellow area is generally where the borrow pit is being proposed, and the purple area is where the landfill is being proposed. Now, the borrow pit will have an excavation. They're going to excavate kind of a bowl and take the clay materials to use for the construction. And the landfill will have a little bit of excavation. They'll both be removing the topsoil and storing it, but then just rubble will be placed in the landfill. And as I mentioned, it'll go in the borrow pit too as part of the reclamation. This is a detail from the site plan. The yellow areas show where the borrow pits are proposed. The small yellow areas is where the topsoil will be stockpiled. It'll be seeded to avoid erosion while it's waiting for reclamation. The red area is where the landfill is being proposed, and the small red area is where that topsoil will be stockpiled. That little blue area that's not filled in, there's plans for a construction yard, but it is associated with the highway. It's not associated with the borrow pit or the landfill. So it would not be part of the CUP. It's just being shown for context. That will require a temporary business use permit from the Zoning and Codes Office. And so in their use narrative that's included with their application, truck traffic could range from 0 to 100 trucks a day, depending upon how much construction is happening. They plan to operate from sunrise to sunset. No exterior lighting is being proposed. The highway project is expected to be finished in 2028. And then they noted that existing trees would minimize dust to nearby properties. They do have a phasing plan. Basically, it's just prepare the soil first, do your excavation, do your landfill, and then that would also be the reclamation, and then do your restoration or your reclamation. So when we review CUPs, we have a set of review criteria, and the golden factors are included in these, and I'll go through these for the projects. and I'm just going to go through them together to save time. The first review criteria is the proposed use compliant or compatible with the zoning and land uses in the area. The zoning map on the left shows the zoning in the area is agricultural. We do have LB, which is a lake-oriented business. That's that mini storage, boat and RV storage facility. And across Highway 40, we have CP zoning, which is clustered preservation, and that's the rural residential zoning district. Given the width of a right-of-way for K10 and the amount of traffic and then the construction traffic, it's not expected that the landfill or the borrow pit activity would have any impact on the residences on the other side of K10. I think it'll be buffered by all the activity that's actually happening on K10. And the zoning in the area being agricultural, it should be compatible with that zoning. The figure on the right shows the contours in the area. One of the concerns we had with this review, or one of the factors we wanted to look into, is that there is a swale in the southeastern corner that leads down and connects to this stream, which leads down and feeds into Clinton Lake. So concern with the drainage through that landfill was something that we looked at, and we'll be discussing that a little bit more. And this land use map from the Douglas County Appraiser's Office shows the land use classifications. The green is agricultural, the light green is open space, that's the Clinton State Park. Purple is that mini storage. There's a landscape business to the west in red, and everything in yellow is single family residential. And the blue up to the north is a institutional use, that's a church. So the proposed use would be compatible with these open space agricultural uses. We also look to see, is the proposed use compatible with the character of the neighborhood? Usually we look at about a mile out from the subject property, being the area we assume that this use would impact. And in this case, I'm not looking to the east of K10 highway. As I said, I don't think anything on this side is going to impact the properties to the east of K10. So this graphic shows a mile to the north and west and south of the subject property. The red dots are residences. And as you can see, they're separated. There's a wooded stream corridor running down to Clinton Lake. Most of them are separated by that, as well as by quite a bit of distance. There is one residence on that dotted line, which is a truck route. It's uninhabited, and that road is currently gated. It's going to be paved, so there will be no dust problems. If anyone does move into that house, they would have quite a bit of traffic on some days. We did mail notice to all the property owners, and no one did contact us with comments about that residence. The comments we received were primarily concerned that there might be blasting, and there will be no blasting with this use. And then another concern always with the character of the neighborhood is, where is all the traffic going to go? And as I showed in the truck route, it's going to be a very short bit of time that the truck traffic is going to be in the rural area if this site is selected. And then we look, what is the suitability of the subject property to the uses to which it is currently restricted? So in the Ag 1 district, primarily agriculture is the main use, and most of the property is suited to agriculture. That swale in the southwest corner, it's really not suited to agriculture. It's probably not well suited to many uses just because of the drainage and the topography. But it'll be suited for the landfill, and they intend to grade it in a similar way so the same drainage remains afterwards. And so, as I said, that drainage to Clinton Lake is something that we took into consideration. So we contacted the Division of Water Resources, KDHE, Clinton, the Kansas State Parks and Recreation, or Wildlife and Parks, to see if anyone had concerns with the drainage. We also contacted the Army Corps of Engineers, and they weren't concerned, but the person I spoke with said that if asphalt is sprayed with a certain chemical, that as water rushes over it, that could travel on into Clinton Lake. And so he suggested we either have the asphalt tested or not allow it in the open landfill. And so the applicant indicated they would just rather not have it allowed rather than continually be testing the asphalt. So that is one of the conditions, that the open landfill, it would be clean rubble, but there'd be a further restriction that there'd be no asphalt. And also, once there's a landfill, it depending on the type of landfill, sometimes it's not that suitable for residential development. Solid waste and things where things change and degrade. As I said, clean rubble is very stable. So it's a relatively suitable type of material to build upon later. It does take additional engineering. And so for that reason, a note should be added to the deed informing future property owners that this has been used as a landfill. So that way they know that additional engineering would be needed. You can't just go out and build a house like you would on other property. And so that is also one of the conditions that's being recommended. Another review criteria is what is the impact on the natural environment? Is there any significant impact? And in this area, it's mostly agricultural, so there's not a lot of natural features, but they do have some high quality soils. Quite a bit of it is prime farmland. And this is in the area that's in the west of K10 plan, which is a long range plan, expecting that it will be annexed at some point in time and it would develop into medium density residential uses. So while the use will impact prime farmland, the future land use is for it to turn into medium density urban housing. So the farmland would be impacted at any rate when it's annexed. So it would impact it, but I don't think, considering the future plans, it would be significant. There is a wetland shown on the figure on the right. That's taken from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Wetland Mapper. And they'll map everything that meets the criteria for a wetland. You know, if it has hydric soils, if it's saturated with water for a large period of time, it has water-loving plants. And they mentioned that not everything they have is a jurisdictional wetland. Not every community is going to see what they post as a wetland. A lot of times they show us ponds. And so we have to use our own judgment as to whether or not it's a wetland or is it a farm pond. And usually we contact the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure. And they indicated this is not a wetland that needs to be protected. They considered it a freshwater pond. So there would be no substantial impact with this development on the natural environment, even though it would remove some prime farmland. And then we look at what is the impact on the community, any impact on infrastructure, community services, and utilities. The proposed uses do not need any community services or utilities. There could be an impact on infrastructure, but as a special road is being built to handle, that they're going to use to handle their truck route, and it's going to be minimal traffic on rural streets. And KDOT has contracted for the road maintenance. There should be no community impacts, except for maybe a benefit in allowing the expansion of K10. And then is it compliant or conformance with the recommendations in the comprehensive plan? And one of the things that comprehensive plan notices is that we do have to balance our needs. It's hard to look at just one recommendation. A lot of times you have conflicting recommendations. And so we have to balance the needs of the economy, equitable society, healthy, sustainable environment. They do recommend that we evaluate development proposals for their impacts on critical water sources, which Clinton Lake is. And that's why we looked into the asphalt and are recommending that it not be allowed to be disposed of in the open landfill. It recommends we identify, preserve, and protect wetlands. We did check with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that wetland is not slated for protection. The plans show that it remains after reclamation, but with the heavy equipment, it's likely that it may not. And then that we recognize the need for the extraction of natural resources to keep construction costs economically reasonable. And I think that's where some of that balancing comes in. So looking at all of that, the use is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And then another review criteria is it reasonable to set a time limit on the use? And as KDOT thinks this will be done in 2028, about 3 years, staff is recommending a 5-year time limit. That allows them time to complete their reclamation. And also with a option to come back to you for an extension. If KDOT's schedule runs longer, or if the reclamation takes more time and they need more time, rather than having to do a whole new CUP. If you don't approve the extension, then they would have to go back and request a whole new CUP. We did review it for the zoning regulation standards, and that's explained in the staff report. I'm not going to go through all of those, but we did find that they were all met. Each use has slightly different standards, and this is the reclamation plan. Those darker areas show where the pits and the landfill were. And so they're just for context. What you're supposed to focus on is the contours. It shows how it's going to be graded afterwards. And the soil that was in those topsoil piles will be evenly spread. Once it's graded, evenly spread, and then it'll be seeded. And they expect it to return to agricultural use until such time that it's annexed, and then whenever it's developed into residential. And this is a slide to remind me, because I knew I was going to forget to tell you that we had some comments later in the review process from Southern Star. There's easements running across these lines in the middle. Those are easements. One is the electric company, and they didn't have any concerns. But the one on the northern side, which I can't get my cursor, but the northern right there, that's Southern Star's easement. And there's a bit of that borrow pit or landfill in their easement, and they said that should be pulled out of the easement. They test for hydrocarbons to make sure nothing is leaking out of the gas line, so they don't want anything added to that area. And the applicant is going to remove that. That's one of the conditions of approval. They also wanted this topsoil pile removed. They're hoping to use this for a kind of a staging area for when they have to move some of their utilities. And so the applicant, there's a condition saying that the applicant will work with Southern Star to move that. And in addition, where the access drive, you can see those dash lines where it comes down into this landfill, it crosses their easement. So they want the engineer for the applicant to do a load study to make sure that is not going to impact their pipeline. Or if it does, then they'll develop standards and measures to mitigate it. So the conditions of approval require that load study. And if any measures are needed, they need to be noted on the plan. And so those are the review criteria that I went through, finding that they were met. So Planning Commission voted unanimously to forward these two projects to you with a recommendation for approval, subject to conditions as revised by them. So these are the conditions of approval. These are the things that have to be met before the use can commence. And so we have the tree maintenance, since they said that would remove, dust, making sure that's maintained, the deed with that note about the landfill, the stormwater pollution prevention or the erosion control plan that's approved by KDHE. We need a copy of that. The setback should be staked on site. The applicant noted that the operator has GPS on their vehicle, so they don't need the setbacks to be staked, but this will help zoning and codes when they go out to evaluate, are they compliant? It's easier if they can see where the setbacks are. And of course, the fill and southern easement, they decided not to test them for hydrocarbons, but just to pull that landfill out of that easement. The load study will be done. And then the Planning Commission added a condition that the drainage or stormwater plan shall be approved by the county engineer. Now, these are the conditions or restrictions of use that run with the landfill CUP, or that would run with it if it's approved. The time frame would be 5 years. The fill is limited to clean rubble with that extra provision that no asphalt. They maintain the tree lines, operations limited from sunrise to sunset. Truck and equipment traffic has to be on those roads shown on the truck route. And then the Planning Commission had us add the final condition, just kind of clarifying that this is only for the K10 expansion project. So no one else can use this landfill, or it can't be used past that project. They also voted unanimously for the borrow pit CUP with conditions that they revised. So the conditions of approval, pretty much the same as the other one. The note about the trees being maintained, a copy of the deed. A surety bond is required for quarries or borrow pits. So a surety bond, reclamation bond, something ensuring the county that they have the ability to reclaim this. So the county would be responsible if something happened and they weren't able to finish it. And then a note, the eastern topsoil pile would be moved to avoid conflict with Southern Star. And then the proposed, the drainage stormwater plan would be approved by the county engineer. That was the one that was added by the Planning Commission. The restrictions that run with the use itself, 5-year time frame, fill is limited to only clean rubble. The existing tree lines maintained, hours of operation, the truck route, and then of course that last condition the commission added, limiting this only to the K10 project. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any. And I think the applicant is here today.
Thank you, Mary. I'm sure we will have questions. Are there any questions for Mary before we move to the applicant? Usually we have the applicant speak first and then we'll ask questions as a commission, but I'm comfortable if people have initial things they want to ask.
And I want to remind the commission that we need to disclose ex parte communication.
That's a great idea. So normally we don't specifically call for it. Commissioners are always, allowed to just jump in but if you have had any ex parte communication, that is communications, conversations with people in the public or at large that are likely to speak into how you would be deciding on a vote, this would be a great time to just disclose that. Commissioners, do you have any ex parte communication on this item?
This is Gene Dorsey. I talked to a couple of folks about the area and plans for development and expansion of the city into that area. I talked to the vice mayor of Lawrence, and I also talked to the Watkins Law Office, who's representing the property owner to the north and the west of the project.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any other?
None for me.
None.
None.
I would just say the information I have was also included in the packet in terms of communications from the public. I did reach out to KDOT about blasting, which I know is not a part of this application whatsoever, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to try and check in on that timeline and get information back to that person who had provided public comment. I don't yet have that information. But that's all I have also. So thank you, commissioners. And the applicant, would you care to address us?
Good evening, Commissioners. Chris Storm with Storm Engineering. I'm here tonight representing King's Construction, the contract purchaser of the property from Fairway LC. I prepared the CUP applications for this. We think this site's an optimum site to cause the least amount of impact to the surrounding community while supporting the completion of the K-10 expansion project. So we think we have a great site here, and we've worked with staff to address the concerns, and we're excited about moving forward. And I'm here to answer any questions, and also have some of the King's Construction ownership here. So if you have any other questions, we can answer those.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we will have many. Commissioners, this is kind of a first pass. If there are questions you have for either Mary or the applicant to kick us off, is there anyone who would like to ask some questions?
For the applicant, I guess, I had a question about why asphalt is permitted in one application and not the other. The area that the asphalt is allowed in is upstream from the lower part of the property, and I was just curious as to why asphalt would be allowed in one project and not the other.
So what we were targeting there, and Mary, can I get to kind of the layout without causing too much? I broke it. I'm going to do my best here.
Oops.
I knew I was going to break it. Okay, I'm trying to get there with the mouse. Well, 1 second. So I think this will do it. So this will help me with the colors here. So the red area has water. So that's the area without the asphalt. So what we were trying to do there, we have clean rubble in both the excavated area, which is the 2 yellow areas, and the red area, clean rubble, as defined by KDHE. What we were trying to do with excluding the asphalt out of the red area was protect the water that's kind of where the main drainage from the north of the property. And I don't know if you can see, am I going to get a cursor? Not very well, but in between those 2 yellow areas is where the water is kind of going through the middle of the site. So basically all that water from the north comes through the site in between the 2 yellow areas. I'm going to say runs through the red area. So that's why we were trying to keep the asphalt out of that particular red area to protect it from the concern that the comment that Mary had received back from the Corps, I believe. So in the 2 yellow areas, imagine a big hole where the asphalt's going to be put in and basically covered up with clay. So really there isn't going to be water flowing through it. All that offsite water flows in between those 2 areas. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, one other question, and maybe this is out of your bailiwick, but how is the demolition of the highway going to separate the asphalt out from the concrete so that you put it in the right hole?
Understood. And I would say operational wise with King's Construction, I'm going to take a stab at it. You guys shake your heads if I'm saying something wrong, but on the K-10 highway, it's predominantly asphalt road. There's only concretes in a few areas, like as you approach like exits and that type of thing. So, and bridges, and that's where all the concrete's coming from. K-10 in between those spots is asphalt, correct? So basically when they're taking this stretch out, this goes to this area, they can control that operationally. And then, hey, we're working on this bridge, we're taking the approaches out. This is all concrete abutments and that type of material. That goes down in the red area here. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Any other questions while I'm up?
So then do you anticipate having more asphalt than clean rubble? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't think it's on the plan. It's been a while since I produced this. There were volumes that I provided on the plan, and I'm just a little bit since I've done it. There was like the amount of concrete proposed and like the topsoil, like those boxes that are kind of underneath that, the coloring that's been added to this graphic, if you can see it on yours. Actually, it says, so area topsoil, lean clay and general. So that volume that's being taken out, that would be approximately the volume of asphalt material put back in. And there's preliminary estimates that King's has, with the bidding process that happened, I'm gonna say late last summer, that there's estimates of that material, but the volumes that I show on these plans are planning factors, so they know how much room they, like how much material they're removing from the yellow areas and how much room there is to put the asphalt back in. That asphalt kind of, I don't want to use the term swells, but when it goes in, it doesn't compact as well as earth does.
Okay.
It's kind of nested and has angled pieces, and they're not going to push it into the ground. They're just going to kind of get it in there and then fill over the top. But what we're trying to show with the reclamation plan is it really won't look too much different than the contours that are out there today. Like, we're not going to try to shove all the asphalt, more asphalt, and then have this big mound sitting on the ground that is like, whoa, what's that? It's to kind of match the existing topography that's out there currently.
Okay.
Does that address your concern?
It does. And I believe you also said that KDHE manages the testing for clean rubble. Did I hear that correctly?
There really isn't testing, my understanding. It's the definition and all the material that is being put into this landfill meets the definition
Of clean rubble.
of clean rubble. Like, for instance, something that wouldn't be clean rubble was there's a demolition of a house, so it has wood and all this stuff. That would not meet the definition, therefore it would not go into this landfill.
So will the clean rubble be tested initially to ensure that it meets the definition of clean rubble for KDHE standards?
I don't think there's a testing as much as this is all concrete, may have rebar, this is all asphalt, this is all excess material like soil that's not contaminated. It's just, they dug up this big pile of soil here and they're going to put it, they have to dispose of it. So
Okay.
there really isn't testing, my understanding, there isn't testing associated with this site where they show up, hey, that meets the definition of clean rubble. There isn't a gatekeeper. It's just as long as they meet this condition. Now, if somebody would, from zoning and codes, go out there and like, hey, this stuff that's sitting over here is not defined as clean rubble, that would have to be addressed because they're not meeting the conditions of the CUP.
Okay.
But there isn't like a testing. Now, part of the construction yard, there will be a dumpster where, like, I'm going to call it shipping, wrapping of products that are being stored there will go into the dumpster, not into the landfill. Like, that is a separate issue. That cannot be put back and still meet the definition of clean rubble.
Okay.
KDHE, to short answer, KDHE is not going to come test this stuff.
Neither clean rubble or asphalt.
No.
No. So there is no test. It's you look and see if it matches, if it fits in that particular
That
criteria.
is my understanding, correct.
Okay. Do we think that we could actually confirm if there is no test? Because I guess when I think about driving on highways, our vehicles, all sorts of vehicles that drive on highways and roads, they leak all sorts of different materials. And then I heard you in the planning committee on December 16th as well state salt. We put all sorts of different materials on our roads as well. And those can be different forms of contaminants. So I just want to make sure that whatever is on our roads are actually not leaching out anything in particular that could be some form of toxins that might actually be in the clean rubble or on the asphalt. Because when we do think about the drainage that is going into Clinton Lake, I do want to ensure that we're mitigating any particular risk for any of that water that might end up in Clinton Lake, and whether it be fish, people who are fishing and eating the fish, or kids and families that are actually swimming in Clinton Lake.
Right, and KDHE does not go out and test to see, is this, if it's asphalt, concrete, soil, maybe those structural steel. Those are the things they look at. So KDHE has been involved in this, and they've indicated that what we're looking at is clean rubble. I did mention testing because that was an option the Army Corps of Engineers said. If they wanted to put asphalt in that southern landfill, they said they could, but they would want it tested to see if those chemicals are on it. And the applicant wasn't interested in testing all the asphalt. So the idea was to just keep it out of that southern landfill altogether. If they wanted to put asphalt in there, it would have to be tested.
So are we even going to do an initial test on the asphalt just to ensure that we know what that baseline is?
No, the idea is just not to have any in the southern landfill.
Okay, because we're not worried at all about anything leaching from that particular landfill.
Because there won't be any asphalt in it.
I'm talking about the the pit.
Borrow pit?
Where the borrow pit.
Yeah, and they're clay, it'll be clay soil, so it'll be very impermeable. So once you get everything in there, it's likely to stay in there. It's not like it's going to get into the groundwater. KDHE doesn't have any concerns with it leaching into the groundwater. They allow asphalt to be stored in clean rubble pits anywhere, even where the groundwater is very shallow. So that's not a concern with them. The only concern we had is since it's overland water going straight into Clinton Lake, should we be concerned about any of the clean rubble? And they indicated the only thing they would be concerned about is if the asphalt had been sprayed with those chemicals. And so we just have a recommendation to say, keep all the asphalt out of the landfill.
Okay. And then is there someone at the county or within the planning commission, staff at the county that works with KDHE to manage the BPMs, those best management practices during the CUP process?
KDHE is out of the loop with clean rubble. They are not concerned with them, so they don't permit them and they don't regulate them. Zoning and code staff do keep an eye on them. We had a clean rubble landfill up north of town when this was a KU building was demolished a few years back. They were taking some of that there, clean rubble. So the CUP was approved, but it also had that condition. It could only be clean rubble. And so zoning and code staff went out. I went with them one time, and you just go out and you visit the site unexpected and you see what is being disposed. Is it clean rubble? And so having these infrequent or these unexpected kind of inspections to make sure that what's being put there is what's supposed to be. And also if anyone mentions a concern, then of course zoning and codes would go out. And the zoning and codes director is, she's remotely in this meeting. So if you have questions more about how they look into it and how they would enforce that, she could answer those questions.
Okay. And then lastly, has the county engineer approved of these particular plans?
The county engineer, he could answer that. He didn't express any concerns to me, but I don't want to speak for him. So I think he's also remotely on this meeting, so he could answer that.
Okay.
Commissioner, generally the county engineer only approves road design plans. He doesn't necessarily review and approve every conditional use permit.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So either Sarah or Mary, I would just circle back to that. One of the conditions, probably Mary, that was added by the planning commission was to have the county engineer sign off on the stormwater prevention plan, which actually is a document through KDHE, I believe. Can you just address how they got there and if that's unusual?
I don't think they were talking about the SWP3. That's more of an erosion plan. I think they were looking at the contours that were shown on the reclamation plan. And it may be because they've recently looked at that solar facility that did have a big drainage study and they've got drainage study kind of in their minds. We didn't ask for a drainage study with this. Just the contours show you where the drainage is going to go. It's going to follow the same drainage pattern. It's going to be grassed when this is all over. The drainage will go through the open landfill. That's why there's no asphalt. So, if you want a drainage study and you want it reviewed by someone, you could make that a condition, and you could have a third party review a drainage study, you know, if you felt that was a concern. But if you look at the contours on the reclamation plan, it's going to follow the same pattern it is now. It'll be grass, there'll be no additional impervious surface. So it doesn't seem like there would be an increase in any stormwater runoff. In my opinion, I'm not an engineer, so perhaps I should leave that to the engineers.
So I guess my question was, it is on the list of conditions that was added by the Planning Commission, is it not, to have something that goes through the county engineer?
Yes, the planning commission added that they want the county engineer to look at the drainage and, you know, to note if he approves of it or if he doesn't. And as Sarah said, that's not really what he does usually. Sometimes we have items in the Maple Grove district where you have to do detention, and he does review those drainage studies to make sure they're providing adequate detention. We don't have a detention requirement here. So, but Chad could probably tell you more what he thinks about the drainage.
Okay. So just to clarify that we have a proposed condition from the Planning Commission that didn't necessarily come from staff, but we are asking something from a county staff person, but we probably will need to check with them if they want to do that or find that to be
That's
of
probably
value.
a good idea.
So,
Yes.
yeah.
Mary, can you stop sharing your screen there just so if we have questions if someone wants to talk to Tanya or Chad, we can do that. Thanks.
Commissioner, do we have specific questions that we want to ask? I'll go ahead and poke Tanya, if you don't mind coming online here to talk about the process of how zoning and codes monitors and enforces, and if you were to come up with an issue to say what we think what's being put in the landfill may not meet the definition of clean rubble fill, what happens then after that? So rather than testing, what is the compliance piece?
Yeah, hi, this is Tanya Voigt, Zoning and Codes Director for Douglas County. So we currently have 2 permitted clean rubble landfills in the county right now that we regulate. And we regulate by condition. We also regulate by the contents that KDHE identifies as permitted materials that you can put in a clean rubble landfill. So if we were to either get a complaint or happen to be driving by and we identified that there was material that was was outside of what's permitted in a clean rubble landfill, we would notify the developer and or applicant immediately, and we would have them actually remove that content if that, had already started to be covered in with dirt, or we were concerned how deep it was, or if it, had been going on a while. It would be a stop work order in our office while we addressed, how much of that material had gone in. I do want to note, though, that we do not have any testing requirements if that's not a condition of the CUP for testing groundwater or, contaminants or those type of things. And we currently do not do that with the other clean rubble landfills. And so that would need to be a condition that would be added in order for us to be able to come back. And if there, were concerns about contamination, we would need to have an avenue to be able to test it. But currently, right now, there's no condition set for that. So we would not be testing for any type of contaminants in the groundwater or on the asphalt. Neither of those would apply for our office.
Tanya, just a follow-up question there. What is the process of just observing what's going on there and flagging something? So it's not a question of testing, just a question of observation, or you mentioned complaint. We do have a complaint-based system that the public is usually very good about monitoring things for us.
Yeah, so we, have several hundred different conditional use permits and different active permits going at all times. And so we typically don't monitor sites. Those are usually triggered by complaints of neighbors. And those are usually, associated with traffic or, some concern that a neighbor has is what really triggers our office to go out. So we do not just, stand at a site and monitor unless a complaint is brought to us, and then we follow up with that complaint.
Thank you. Does anyone have any follow-up questions for Tanya? Go ahead.
Tanya, Gene Dorsey here. One of the conditions on one of the permits was that a bond be issued to make sure things are restored properly. And in there it says the planning manager will approve those. I just wanted to confirm that they're talking about you.
That's correct. Typically, our office, we work with legal, county legal on any bonds. And then we, set the bond amount, make sure everyone agrees on that bond amount. We make sure that it's posted and that it's been posted with the clerk's office. So that actually is all monitored and handled through the zoning and codes office.
The questions for Tanya at the moment? Okay. Thank you for being here. I think just to follow up with another set of conversations there, if Chad Voigt is available to just take a question about the planning commission proposed this this other condition. Can you respond to if that is? It seems like it is unusual. That's not something that typically falls under your office. Do you have concerns about it?
Sure, I can do that. Good evening. I'm Chad Voigt, county engineer. And yeah, the planning commission added that comment, and I did review this development, and I didn't see a need for a stormwater study. And they're going to return the ground to previous conditions, basically at the end. And when this develops, it'll create a change in runoff when it annexes and develops. But I wouldn't see that as something we consider right now with this activity. So I don't think a stormwater study is needed. I think the big concern is the KDHE angle and making sure that the pollution prevention plan, the erosion sediment control plan is in place to protect Clinton Lake. That's really the big concern in terms of stormwater, but a drainage study implies to me, a change in runoff, and I don't see a need for that with this. And just to kind of close the loop, we do see every development come by, those development planning emails go out to all of us. And if there's a need for stormwater management, we do flag that and look at it. And that could be outside of Maple Grove. It could be countywide. And we've looked at other developments that needed some, review of drainage. It might be a downstream culvert or something. Typically, we're not doing detention because, our developments are less intense. But so just to close that loop on the prior comment. So in this case, I think we're good with stormwater review and we wouldn't need to do anything additional.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any follow-up questions for Chad at the moment? Okay, thank you, Chad. Commissioners, do you have other questions for staff or the applicant before we turn to public comment, which will be our next step?
I have some questions about setbacks. I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not.
You're certainly welcome to.
Okay. For the applicant, in my discussions with the vice mayor of Lawrence and the attorneys for the property owners of the property to the north and west, they all agreed with each other that this land will probably be annexed and development will start within the next 2 to 3 years. And I know Watkins Law recommended a 250-foot setback from the property lines. I think that's a little onerous on you. I'm just wondering if 100 feet, which is the city requirement, would work on your site.
So to clarify on your question, are you talking, when you mentioned annexation within the next 2 or 3 years?
I'm not saying your property.
Okay.
I'm saying the property to the north and potentially to the west also.
So the setbacks that are shown on the CUP plans are in conformance with the county requirements. In addition to along the north, the requirement is,
I think 70 and 30.
well, actually the requirement is 50 and we actually show 7-foot setback. So we've moved from the north property line an additional 20 feet beyond what's required from the city of Lawrence, or sorry, the county requirements. So, I mean, the issue with, let's call it, I'm going to call it squeezing the size of it or moving away from the edges is you just make everything deeper and have to go up higher because you're putting it on less area. What we're trying to do is get this back to what it was. This isn't a proposed use forever. This is short term. What we're trying to do is get it back to what it is currently. So you go out there and you see grass and you see as it would be today. Squeezing it makes that a lot more difficult. And we're meeting the requirements that are currently in the county requirements. Plus along the north side, I've added 20 feet. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything further before we move to public comment? All right, this is a public comment item. Is there anyone here who's with us in person who would like to give public comment on this item? Sarah, do we have anyone online? Okay, just a last call. Anyone here for public comment? All right, without closing public comment and bringing it back to the commission for further conversation, further questions, or comments, thoughts, and votes.
This is Commissioner Reed. I'll just share sort of my thoughts and feedback about what we've heard and learned about the specifics of asphalt and the conditions to limit where that goes. I think that it makes sense to me, and I actually prefer, although we may have different reasons for it, that the applicant chose to limit where it would go based on the topography and drainage patterns that we're aware of now, versus testing it along the way. Testing it seems, I'm sure, costly, but also sort of intensive and not a guarantee per se that every single inch of the road asphalt that was broken up could be tested adequately, or that it seems a bit like a cumbersome thing. So I was glad to hear that that option was presented after the feedback from the Corps, and that the choice was to limit where it goes. And to address some concerns that other commissioners may have about testing in general for that and whether or not there's an opportunity to baseline test, I think that I'm personally not supportive of that, because I don't believe that anything about KDHE standards sort of dictate that or give us reason to have concern, and specifically because we're talking about runoff patterns and drainage of storm water and water that's running over land versus the groundwater. That right now the asphalt on that road is consistently experiencing runoff, and whatever particulates are on that road are already being washed away with rains, melting snow and whatnot. So I don't believe that the activity of breaking up that asphalt, among the other things, but specifically the asphalt, and then containing it in a clean rubble landfill presents any more significant or concerning risk to any possible contamination there is. And I think, my understanding and experience with if and when testing for contamination is needed is really directed by KDHE, and it's often specific to, heavy industrial uses, and even some farmland practices, and chemicals that were specifically used on soiled ground, and vegetated ground. And so I'll just share that that's my perspective. I appreciate that the Corps of Engineers identified that potential concern, even if it may not be a particularly significant one on that site, that it's still a concern. And I appreciate that the applicant was willing to just find a plan to mitigate that so that it shouldn't present a concern as far as I can tell. And additionally, I'll share that I appreciate Commissioner Woolley's questions and Chad's comments and response. When I watched the Planning Commission meeting, I do not find that condition that was added by planning commissioners to be necessary. Some could argue that it's prudent, I suppose, and not a harmful condition per se, but I also don't believe that it's necessary in this instance, in part because of what we heard about the fact that this is not a permanent use of the land. It's going to return to its current state more or less in terms of topography, and that future developments may very well change some of those drainage patterns, but that those are conversations and potential stormwater studies and whatnot to be considered when there is development in the area that is going to affect some of that downstream. So I'm personally supportive of removing that condition. If other commissioners agree, I think that it's not necessary. And I also think that we should be thoughtful about setting a precedent of requiring sort of these extra and not truly necessary studies and reviews by county staff that I don't want to set a precedent for that on every single CUP. I think that it makes sense that those are for limited circumstances, particular land uses, and also very site specific, right? So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Who else would like to weigh in?
I don't believe that we need a drainage study, so I really appreciate your comments, Commissioner Reed. But I want to go back to our county engineer and Chad's comments about that he did think that ensuring that we don't have any runoff or any contaminants going into Clinton Lake, that could be beneficial to the CEP, and just ensuring that we do have some sort of mitigation plan in place for the CUP. So I'm not sure what that looks like, but I would like us to think through what that might look like. So I don't know if that is testing. I don't know if that's working with staff and the Planning Commission to put something in place just to ensure that we don't end up with any sort of contaminants moving forward. I do understand that absolutely we have runoff off of highways. But at the same time, when we crush and we break down any sort of highway materials, I believe we create dust, and we do create possibly other contaminants that could possibly run off. And no, I'm not an expert in this particular area, but I just want to ensure that we are, as leaders, that we're making the right decisions and just really covering all of our bases.
Others?
I might relay some of the information I gathered when I was talking to people. The 875 road was negotiated by the property owners north of the subject property. He traded some land to the state, and the state agreed to put in the 875 road that'll be used for the trucks going to the dump site, but it will also be the only way for people to get to the Clinton Dam area once they close the 23rd Street interchange, which is going to be closed for a year or two as they work on that curve there. So there will be other traffic on the road in addition to trucks. And everybody I talked to said that is the prime area for expansion by the city, and they believe it will happen within the next 2 years or so.
Just a couple points of order in terms of just making sure that we recognize that the road's not part of the CUP in front of us. That's been separately negotiated and can't really weigh into any decision that's made on the CUPs before us. Just want to state that. Also, if information's coming from the public to commissioners that may impact, a vote, that's great to put out ahead of time so that the applicant has a chance to respond to that if needed. So I just want to flag a little bit out of order, but if there's anything that you've heard there that is new information from the community that you as an applicant feel you need to respond to, just give me a heads up and I'll flag that. Okay, thank you.
Just weigh in on a couple thoughts. As far as asphalt, when I read the packet, it said that the Corps noted that there could be some contaminants on the asphalt. if treated or sprayed. No one, to my knowledge, asked what was sprayed or was on that. So I would assume, yeah, I'm going to make the same assumption that Commissioner Reed made, that the chemicals that we're putting on our roadways are going to eventually move downstream and into large reservoirs of water. And so therefore, and I tried to look up what KDOT's pre-qualified materials were for laying onto roadways. And, you know, a lot of thought has been put into what those materials are. And I'm sure our Public Works Department has thought similarly about those types of materials. So my concern, it sounds like we contacted the Corps. They said there could be, but they actually didn't say that they required any additional permitting or express concern with the placement of asphalt. To my understanding of Mary's concern, it was just something that was offered to the applicant, and they made a bit of a change. So KDHE doesn't require it. They say that you can put asphalt in it. So I'm making, again, an assumption that they have tested on how these materials break down and how that could impact our water sources. You know, I think sometimes when we borrow pits, and landfills are usually not great things to talk about when it comes to land use, but they are necessities that happen because we need infrastructure. And in order to build the infrastructure, we're going to have to borrow land from one place to put it in another. And as we tear things down, we're going to need to do landfills. We have the same problem with quarries and things like that. And so I actually, in reviewing this application, thought it was very close to the site. That's not always the situation. Usually it requires a number of miles. We're not talking about an asphalt plant here. We're talking about a site to borrow materials to build the road. So it seems like the applicant has tried to listen to the concerns and make accommodations for the harms that have been raised as best they can. We may think about development in the future, but really that's a guess. We don't know. So we could say that we hope to have development there in 2 years, but we don't know that we will. I think we've hoped to have development there for many years and haven't seen it happen. So based on the information that I have, based on KDHE's recommendations, based on the work that's done by KDOT, and they're not recommendations, by the way, from KDHE, they're requirements, and the work of staff, I'm comfortable with the CUP. I would agree. I think we're sort of transferring one application to another when we're adding the review of the county engineer. And I just don't think that's necessary in this situation. I think planning staff did a fine job on evaluating the application, and we don't need every one that comes through need to be approved by the county engineer.
I would start by saying I'm thrilled to get an application for something like this. It doesn't put trucks on gravel roads. That's so rare, and very glad that that's not part of the conversation we have to have with this in terms of the truck traffic. Kanawha Township has been through a lot with Highway 40 being closed for some time, and I'm really glad that this was all thought of ahead of time in terms of how that truck traffic will be managed with the CUP. So I'm really pleased for that. It's a very straightforward plan. We also rarely see something like this that has as much space around it as it does in terms of other residences. That's pretty unusual. So I think it is an excellent fit. It's also an upland site. Most of these borrow pits and fill have been requested in floodplains because it's flat and easy to get to, but it has other implications. So nobody loves these land uses, but they're absolutely necessary for ensuring safe and efficient transportation in our community, which is part of what we're tasked for as a commission. I would make a couple of notes about asphalt in general. As a society as a whole, we've decided that this is an acceptable risk, that we pave many of our roads with asphalt. It not only does the water run off of that into our water bodies, but we've had a great deal of freeze thaw and scraping of that asphalt with a lot of heavy equipment lately. This is all part of, rightly or wrongly, what our society has concluded is a right and proper use for that material. KDHE, KDOT, our own county engineers, like this is a product and a surface that we have all agreed to use as part of our safe transportation network. I was pleased that the applicant was willing to kind of go with that abundance of caution in terms of pulling the asphalt, pulling that as an option from the southern site, from the drainage site. I think that was, above and beyond, but it made our conversation a little bit easier about that with the water that's running through it. I certainly don't want to take these kind of these willing efforts by an applicant to, make sure that they manage our concerns ahead of time and just flag that into further regulation. I think that can be a trend. So, I mean, I appreciate that the setbacks were already, larger than what the county had required. And I know that the use of the site, the volume of what comes out and what volume that goes in, like that was all being balanced there. So I'm very in favor of the application. I think that a lot of the questions that I would have asked had already been answered. I do think staff did a great job on this, and I am in supportive of it. Commissioners, I want to ask if there are other thoughts you want to share before we look for motions, or if there are other questions. I would also flag kind of further that I think that the proposed condition to loop the county engineer in with this, I think, is more than is needed. I think it's already gone before him. He didn't have any concerns. I don't see the need to circle back. I am always, cautious of staff time. We ask a lot of them, and if I felt we needed to, I certainly would. But in this case, I don't see the need. So, commissioners, other thoughts or reactions to what you hear from other commissioners?
Commission, I did want to just clarify on the stormwater, if there is a discussion about removing that condition, there is still the requirement that the applicant does submit what's called a notice of intent or an NOI that would go to KDHE, that would go through the best management practices or the BMPs that you mentioned. And ultimately that is what's called a SWIP. So that's what we start to talk about with silt fencing and the like. So again, just because the removal of the stormwater plan condition, there are still parts of that are still going to be required just as a normal requirement.
Correct. Yeah, and I wouldn't want to take and couldn't take over any of the state's jurisdiction for their ability to regulate erosion and such. So, and it might help actually, Mary, if you would pull up the list of conditions for each of these, just so that we can make sure that we've flagged the language correctly.
Yes, thank you for that request of Mary, Commissioner Willie. While Mary is looking for that, I also just wanted to flag it's just a technical typo error that seems to have occurred throughout the report. I don't think it's a big deal in the staff report, but maybe as part of the resolution, instead of CUP in several places, it just says UP. For some reason, like the C got cut off, and I only wanted to flag it in case staff hadn't noticed it for the resolution portion, so that could be corrected.
Well, actually, the city just has a new software system for our applications. And so when it came in, it changed the names of things.
Oh.
So CUPs and I think SUPs in the city are all called UPs. And so that's the new
permits.
file name, but technically
okay.
that's the file number. It's still a CUP, even though
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
And so this page is for the landfill, and these are the conditions of approval. This is where the stormwater plan is.
I think the only condition that had truly been discussed was the last one that was added by the Planning Commission that's underlined.
So then the next set of conditions are the ones that apply to the CUP itself, the time frame. And the one the planning commission added was just to clarify that this is tied solely to the K-10 project.
And they're not numbered on your slide, Mary, but in the resolution, it's
Number
condition
6.
And I don't have any difficulties with tying the project to the landfill. And I don't know that the applicant expressed any, at least in the planning commission, we haven't asked specifically here. But I'll go ahead and ask if you have any issues with that. That seemed a fairly straightforward addition.
It's fairly straightforward. We have no issues with that. I mean, the only, what we have this size for is for this part of the SLT project. To do something farther north, it has to change. Process wise, we would have to change something because again, we have so much room, we can only fit so much stuff in there and we have it sized just right now.
Thank you. Commissioners, if there's no other thoughts, we can entertain a motion.
And commissioners, I want to clarify, you've got 2 actions in front of you. I think you can make a motion on the first one, but I would caution you to open up public comment again for the second CUP just to make sure.
That would be great. I will do that. So we're looking for, if commissioners are ready, a motion on the first conditional use permit, the 24-1010.
This is Commissioner Reed. I will move to approve a conditional use permit, CUP-24-1010 for a landfill use to facilitate the K-10 highway expansion project west of K-10 highway and north of North 1415 Road based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the resolution except for condition 6, which I move to be stricken and adopt resolution number 25-06.
Second.
Commissioners, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further conversation? Okay. With that, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? Motion passes. And what was recommended and greatly appreciated was to reopen public comment before entertaining a vote on the second CUP.
I was going to have her
Let's-
stop sharing.
Let's leave
Okay,
them
that's
up and-
fine.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. Is there any member of the public who would like to make public comment on the second CUP? This is 24-1011. Seeing no one in person. Sarah, do we have any hands raised online? Thank you. That closing public comment, and I would entertain a motion for CUP 24-1011.
Commissioner Willie, I'm just trying to double check that we don't have an identical condition number 6 on this one.
It's actually going to be item number 4. in
Okay,
that
thank
CUP.
you. I was trying to find it in the right spot. In that case, it's Commissioner Reed again. I move to approve a conditional use permit 24-1011 for a mining, excavation, and extraction of natural resources use based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the resolution, with the exception of condition number 4 that I move to have stricken and adopt resolution number 25-07.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. That brings us to our next item. This is an item of county code for chapter 5. I would ask commissioners if anyone has an interest in a break before we move to our next item. All right. Sarah, do you mind kicking us off for our code amendment?
Thanks, commissioners. Yeah, I'm going to introduce this item and then introduce our team members here that are here to talk about Chapter 5. As the County Commission is aware, we've been trying to update certain sections of the county code for about 2 or 3 years now. And Chapter 5 has been on our list for a while. And part of the complexity with Chapter 5 is that sections of it had been updated, but it still represented an order that reflected that emergency management reported to the emergency medical services, which at that point in time would have been years and years ago, when it was Douglas County Ambulance Service, or DCAS. And so while it had been updated in parts, it really was never reordered to structurally get things in the proper order for where we are today. So that required really a complete rewrite of the chapter. So we've been working with legal counsel and staff at Emergency Management and Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical to do a complete rewrite of this chapter and reorder it completely so that it is reflective of how we're operating today. But then we also took the opportunity to update some sections on it. So some of this is clerical and cleanup, and some of this is we updated some sections. I'm going to have John Darling, our Director of Emergency Medical Services, and our Acting Chief, Joe Hardy, come to the podium and talk about the more substantive changes related to EMS in Chapter 5. And while they're pulling that up, in addition to those substantive changes that you're going to hear about, the old code used to specifically refer to the rates we would charge for ambulance service. When we have things that specific in county code, it means every time we need to update those, which honestly we should be updating every time Medicaid updates their rates. We have to go back into the code. We have to pass a resolution and publish it in the paper twice and update the website. What we've been trying to do with our code is to simplify pieces of this. Any changes related to the fee structure will still come before the county commission and receive a public process, but I don't have to pay to publish that necessarily in the paper. And it allows us a little more flexibility in terms of how we set those fees and how we bring them to you. So we cut that piece out. It will still be passed by the commission. You will still see it and review it. It's just not going to be listed in, and frankly, a place in the code that I don't think most people would ever go to look for it, because I don't think most people look at the county code to figure out how much their ambulance ride's going to be. And guys, if I'm missing any sections of this because you were closer to some of the rewrites of Chapter 5, please just step up. But if that's a decent overview and commissioners don't have any questions for me on that, I'll just turn it over to our friends from LDCFM to run us through the substantive changes.
There. Good evening. My name is Joe Hardy. I'm our acting fire chief for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical. So appreciate having us here tonight. I wanted to make sure I came along because I wanted to introduce myself to you guys. I'm a familiar face here, but I've been in the department for 28 years. And so look forward to having more meetings after this and becoming familiar. Our goal is to be transparent in anything we do. And so hopefully we'll get to do that. So it's good to be here on a night like tonight, back in the old commission room, county commission room and courtroom, and just being able to be part of even this change of 5 people. And so welcome to the group. Thank you for having us. And I hope you get to enjoy the presentation John's going to do. John does a great job. So after you see this, if you have any questions, we'll answer those. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chief Hardy. So a couple warning notes. I do tend to talk fast. I'll try to keep it slow, but if you need me to slow down, just do one of these numbers. Also, I know that we're kind of talking about a lot of legal language. And so if you want to flag me mid-presentation to ask a question, please feel free to do so. You don't have to hold your questions to the end because I know there's a lot that we're going to go over today. So with those caveats out of the way, we'll get started. Okay, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm doing throughout this is, I believe in the agenda packet, you have a copy of the new Chapter 5. And what I'm doing is there's the clauses in the chapter so it's like 5-402, 5-403, and the page numbers refer to the page numbers in the actual code. So like the center of, there's like the page number of the packet, and then there's the page number of the code. So when I'm saying page 8, that's that center number. So if you want to follow along, because I'm trying to structure this in a way that will be the easiest understood, which means I'm going to kind of bounce around through the code. So if you have any questions about where are you, that can go. So first and foremost, the code states Douglas County will provide EMS and ambulance services within the county and defines multiple mechanisms for doing so. That could be with county personnel and equipment. That could be combining, coordinating activities, facilities, and personnel with another entity, which is sort of what LDCFM is. There's contracting with a third party or any other options that are authorized by law. That's just kind of like that enabling language. Okay. Then it goes into the roles of the county administrator. It said oversee and administer provision of EMS and ambulance service, negotiate contracts.
Chief Darling, you're right. You do speak very loudly,
sorry.
very quickly, and our room acoustics don't necessarily allow for that.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you for calling me. Okay, so oversee and administer the provision of EMS and ambulance services on behalf of the county, negotiate contracts and other agreements, establish EMS and ambulance fees, and then collaborate with the city of Lawrence to establish fees that are specifically associated with LDCFM when it comes to EMS and ambulance services. And that's on clause 405 on page 9. What we're really doing here, and this is sort of the meat of how this change is that we're defining two separate modes by which ambulance transport happens. The first is emergency transport, and that's what I think most people think of when they think of an ambulance. That's someone picks up the phone, calls 911, we send an ambulance with paramedics and EMTs to their house or wherever else they're having a problem, and we take them to the hospital. And that's what emergency transport is. There is also a relatively large portion of our business is what we are calling non-emergency transfers. And that's basically the patient is not at their house. This patient is at a hospital. And now we're talking about how do we get them to a different hospital because they might have like a surgical procedure scheduled. They might have like a VA hospital where they need to get to that particular facility, or they might be being discharged from the hospital, going to a nursing facility or back to a private residence. Our current practice is that we use the same ambulances that provide 911 service to also provide those non-emergency transfer services. And the issue is, you know, it's a zero-sum game. Every time that we have an ambulance on a non-emergency transfer, they're by definition not available to respond to an ambulance in their district. So that's a concern for us as our call volume increases. So in the revised code, LDCFM is primarily responsible for emergency transports, but it enables the county to authorize and license private third-party ambulance services to provide those non-emergency transfers. It also says that Douglas County, excuse me, can empower LDCFM to dispatch, manage, and supervise those third-party ambulance service operators, and that LDCFM and the Douglas County Emergency Communications Center can use a digital platform or computer-aided dispatch to deploy those third-party units. What we're thinking of is ideally we have multiple third-party providers who are willing to chip in, and then we might operate something like the non-preference list for tows if there's a car accident and we rotating through the towing companies. So similar situation here, if one third-party provider can't do it, then we'll be able to move it to another person. Ideally, I expect that LDCFM will be the ultimate fallback, where if there is no other option, we'll do that. And so we can't say that we're going to completely eliminate the non-emergency side of our operations, but we're going to try to limit that to assist us in providing more 911 resources. The requirements for ambulance service license is it's going to be a joint city-county license that has to be approved by both the city and county commissions, and that all ambulance service operators must comply with all rules and regulations of the Kansas Board of EMS in order to operate in the state of Kansas. The process by which a third-party ambulance service would be established is you would file an application. They would file an application with the city clerk. The medical director would review and make a recommendation to the commissions. I'll talk more about the medical director on the next slide. There's 45 days after that for the city, excuse me, and county to have a public hearing. And it spells out certain things to consider, which includes if that proposed service is an unnecessary duplication, if current services adequately serve public needs, and if the proposed service would harm existing ambulance services. It was I think ideally we want to have as many people as possible able to help, but we don't want to get to the point where we've made it so that no one can operate a profitable service. And so then we effectively then lose that ability for the public to have that service. To issue the license, both the city and county have to approve the application, and then the medical director has to inspect that third-party ambulance service before they are allowed to start operating. So as I said, the medical director, previously in the code, a lot of these responsibilities were to the director of the Lawrence Douglas County Public Health Department. In conversations, we thought the subject matter expert on how an ambulance service should be operated and the standards it should follow is the medical director of whatever agency is providing emergency transport services, which is currently LDCFM. So that's the physician under whose license we practice. And so that's the person we think is probably the ideal subject matter expert to determine whether or not we want to have this third-party service qualified. So the medical director will review those ambulance service license applications, will perform those inspections, and then we'll also have the ability to authorize specialty services, which is defined on the next slide. So specialty services are ambulances and attendants with specialized equipment and training that go above and beyond what can be provided by a standard ambulance. Examples listed are the critical care transports, a mobile NICU, bariatric transport for extremely obese patients, or maternal fetal transport. These are all things that are outside the realm of what our 911 units are able to handle as effectively because they have those specialized tools, equipment, and often have additional personnel. So we wanted to make sure that we have language that enables those patients who meet those criteria for those specialty services to get the best possible care. So what we've set up is that the medical director can authorize those ambulance services that are operating within Douglas County to also provide specialty services based on his inspection, or their inspection, I should say. The rates, I think the county administrator already spoke about how we kind of took the dollar amounts out and came up with basically now they have to have maximum permitted fees and rate schedules that are approved by the city and county, has to get filed with the city court, and it's subject to approval by both the city and the county. So it seemed to me kind of like a utility where like you can't just raise rates without, you know, having some sort of documentation and say so. So that's sort of the idea there, is that we wouldn't have to change the code every time we want to change rates. It's more adaptive. And I think this is also an equity issue because previously, when we would look at what rates we want to have, we would have to sort of eyeball how long do we think it's going to be before the next time we change. So we have to like put rates in that we think are high enough that they'll mitigate till the next time. Well, that means we might be charging higher than we really should right now. Now that we can be more adaptive, we can hopefully fine tune those so we're not taking any more than we need to, you know, make the operations work. The license terms, their licenses are issued for renewable 5-year terms. One of the standards is they have to provide the services to all persons without discrimination based on insurability or economic status, and they have to be operating in all parts of the city or county. They can't just be, we're going to be only in responding in this one area. They have to obviously comply with all federal, state, and local laws, and they are subject to inspection at any place or any time by the medical director or their designated representative. They also have to make their books and records promptly available to the city or county upon request. And we established minimum liability insurance standards to, again, make sure that we're not letting people operate in a position where all of a sudden our people don't have the ability to recover if they do have a issue. We define the license renewal process and timeline. Basically, it's the same process to get initially revised. We also talk about what happens if a ambulance service license needs to be suspended or revoked, and that is by a joint city-county action. In general, we would give them written notice, and there was going to be a public hearing about suspension or revoke. However, there's also a clause that if the medical director believes there's a danger to public health and safety, they can do an immediate stop work that we don't have to wait for the hearing if there's something going on that's beyond the pale, obviously. Again, it says they have to comply with all the specifications and rules by the Kansas Board of EMS, and says that we're not going to do emergency transport services with less than 7 fully staffed and operational ambulances, which is the number LDCFM currently has. So we're just saying we're not going to decrease our capabilities.
Can I flag that one? That was actually in my notes. I was just curious about that. You know, in emergency transport, it does fall under LDCFM. It was curious to me to see it in here as an option that it could be somebody else, and therefore they should have 7 ambulances. I just that I knew we were talking about, opening up the possibility for a non-emergent transport, but this would suggest that we could contract with another organization to do emergency transport so long as they had 7 ambulances and met all the other. Is that intended to kind of leave that door open for that? And
I believe there's enabling language at the beginning where it talks about the options by which it says Douglas County will provide EMS services, and one of the options is to a contract with a third party. What we were just saying is, well, we want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples, where somebody can't come in with like 3 ambulances and say, hey, I can do it cheaper. Well, yeah, because I'm giving you less EMS services. So we see that as just like, hey, that should be the basement. I don't think unless there's a significant population decrease, there would ever be appropriate to decrease the number of 911 resources on the streets.
sure.
But I don't think we're saying that non-emergent transports need 7 ambulances.
No.
So
That's only if
it's-
that's, I just want to make, for transparency, want to say that that's in there. But my expectation is that we may end up kind of sharing multiple non-emergent transport services with jurisdictions like Topeka and Johnson County and KCK, where they may have like a couple of units that float, and that's fine. That works great for us. So
Thank you.
yeah, no, absolutely. So I want to be also transparent about revenue impacts because we do generate revenue for the county. So this chart here is our EMS revenue from 2023. I don't quite have 2024 numbers done yet, but I mean, it doesn't change that much year over year. So last year, the red is the amount that we collected for non-emergency transfers. The darker blue is for emergency transfers. Those are transfers that would still be LDCFMs to take care of. Those are people who they are going from one hospital to another hospital, but it's an emergency. We don't have time to wait. Our people are going to go right to the hospital, take them and go, maybe go lights and sirens, depending on what we need to do. So, and then the pale blue is everything else. So it's about 12% of our annual revenue in 2023 was from those non-emergency transfers. So that is a significant decrease. However, on the back end, we've created a number of efficiencies in our medical claims unit, both with personnel and technology, that I don't want to guarantee we're going to make all of that back, but I believe we're going to get pretty close. So I don't, and if we are a little bit short, the amount of money we're short is way less than it would cost us to put another ambulance on the streets. So there is a revenue impact. I think we can mostly offset it with increased gains in efficiency. Basically, we're able to kind of maximize our recovery from claims that we previously weren't able to kind of get some insurance processes taken care of through some new software that we have and some additional personnel that we already have. So we don't need to invest any more in that. We're going to start seeing that, I think, next year. We're actually in the 2024 numbers when they come out. But again, this isn't a revenue decision. This is about reliability of 911 resources. And the next graph is what I want to show you here is our call volume. So last year, we had 832 non-emergent transfers in our system. And so that chart shows the last 4 years of our total incidents, not just EMS incidents, that's incidents across, because again, I don't have it broken down for 2024 yet. But we went in 3 years from about 14.5 thousand calls to almost to 3,000 more almost in 4 years. So that's a lot of call growth. And the last time I think we added an ambulance was 2017, I think. So we've been a significant period where the demands on our system are growing, but we're not having additional trucks on the streets. So we're trying to find ways to go after it on the demand side. So on the front end, that's our MIH program, which is really trying to help and is actually having a lot of success with diverting
Mobile
people.
integrated
Oh,
health.
sorry, mobile integrated health team, where they're helping people who don't know what to do, who call 911, end up going to the ER to actually go to more appropriate facilities, get primary care, the things that they need to, that then frees up our ambulances, frees up ER beds for people having true medical emergencies. So we're having benefits there. And then on the back end is we're also trying to reduce the time our 911 units spend on non-emergency activities. So this isn't like a scientific guarantee, but what I basically did was took 832 non-emergency transfers, assuming that since our call volume went up by another 800 calls, if we took those out of the mix, if we assume that we had about that many non-emergent transfers in 2024, which I don't have those numbers yet, but I would assume they don't change that much as a proportion year over year. then what we would actually have done is not just stayed steady, we would actually had a slight decrease in call volume from 20. If we had had this in place at the beginning of 2024, it's likely we would have had a decrease in our call volume, or at the very least bent that curve. And that's really what we're doing. We can't do more with less. We've been trying. So we're trying to find ways to take the pieces that are not part of our core mission of responding to medical emergencies and put those to a more appropriate resource and keep the resources that we have available for our citizens when they are having those emergencies. So that's, I think, all I have. Oh, yeah, so let me stop sharing.
Gene Dorsey here. I got a question. How do you classify moving patients between the TRC and the LMH? Does it depend on the situation, or are those always non-emergency transfers?
So that's actually one of the things we're working on right now, is kind of trying to work out some of our processes there, because we have identified some inefficiencies. The way the language is written is it's a transfer from a hospital, because at that point they've already been evaluated by a doctor. They have a care plan in place. And at that point, we aren't just taking somebody else's word for it that, oh no, I don't really need a 911 unit. We've had somebody do that assessment. I suppose if we worked with the TRC to develop language that if they have like an APRN or something there, we could talk about trying to slightly modify that work plan. But for right now, my thought process would be, until we get them evaluated by an ER physician, it would still not qualify. It wouldn't qualify as a non-emergent transfer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Commissioner, until we were able to make this change, it really wasn't something we could look at, because all transports were required to go through LDCFM. So now that we get this changed, then we can evaluate some of those options and determine if there's a better use of resources for that half-block walk.
Yeah.
My other question was, don't you have a monopoly on ambulance services? Are there private companies that we think we can contract with?
For emergency or non-emergency?
Non-emergency.
There are multiple providers that do non-emergent transports.
Okay.
And they weren't as common, 20 years ago, but now there are more and more. I mean, there's Uber Medical. I mean, there are a number of firms that will do non-emergent transport. So that's the part that we would begin to review and license.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioners, this is a chance we can ask questions. If you have more questions, we'll have an opportunity for public comment here. Do we have questions that we specifically want to ask before that time? I will put it out there. This is a legislative item and not quasi-judicial, so we don't have an applicant for it, but we still can call for and take ex parte if we have anything we want to share that want to have part of that conversation. I would just flag that I think all or most of us probably received a letter from the head of the Fire Medical Union, which is Seamus Albrighton, in support of the changes here. I know that the union had been in conversation about some of these changes even before they happened and now, and that did not, I don't think that made it in time for the packet. So I just want to flag that that was something that we had available to us, but is not yet out in the packet. Commissioners, do you have any other conversations about this item that you would want to disclose at this time? And you don't have. No. Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing item also. If there's any member of the public here in the room who would like to give public comment. And we have very few people in the room. So seeing none here, Sarah, do we have anyone with a hand raised online? Okay, thank you. Closing public comment, bringing it back to the commission for any further questions, conversations, and motions. Go ahead.
I'm just excited that I think this is something we flagged a long time ago as a way to, and I really appreciate how you put it. We keep seeing call volumes increase, and that is an additional cost to our taxpayers. And I think it also causes some strain and stress on relationships between our firefighters and the governing bodies as well, is how do we meet the needs without putting more pressure? And so I appreciate staff's work and LDCFM's work on trying to come up with how do we start to address this in a way And it's always seemed like non-emergency transfers was one of those things we didn't want to talk about. And I appreciate the work to get it in there and to see and to come up with a way. I feel really good about some of the systems that are in place. You know, I can't believe we're using our tow operator contract as a model there. That was interesting to me. But you know, it does seem like there's some checks and balances to make sure we get high quality non-emergency transfers at a rate, at a payback rate that seems reasonable, and also how to, if the quality is not what we would expect as a community, we have a way to address that. And my one, I guess I should have asked this question earlier, was it says it comes to the city and the county. Is that an administrative process, or would we approve everything here?
I don't think we've really worked all that out yet. So I think that's something we can get some feedback from you all on and then talk to our friends at the city as to how we want to do that. You know, we review the tow contract annually and you have that list of providers. I think we're going to have some, you know, folks maybe not joining all at once like that, but I think that's something we can definitely talk about.
Thanks.
Commissioners, any other thoughts or questions? I really appreciate this and was glad to see. I know it's been in the works for a while, maybe a long while, but especially the piece that we're all flagging, which is the non-emergency transport. And last February, I did a ride along with Engine 5, and a lot of the discussion around burnout and overtime was about how often people are being called in the middle of the night to go do a non-emergency transport, but also the time that it puts our ambulances on I-70, which is probably more dangerous than anything else an ambulance does, and just the time that it's out, those ambulances are outside of our community for that. So I'm really glad to look into what are the other options. How do we tackle call volumes in ways that do not quite yet build other stations? I think there's a lot of conversations that will occur together and in tandem, but very glad to see the work being done and a lot of great voices that were included in making it happen. So commissioners, if there are no other questions or comments, I would also entertain a motion.
I'm happy to make a motion to adopt resolution 24. Start again. I'm happy to make a motion to adopt resolution 2504 to revise chapter 5 of the Douglas County Code on emergency management and emergency medical services.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further conversation? And seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you for your time.
The next item I'm sorry. I'll let you introduce.
And our next item
Sorry.
is for emergency management, and I will turn it to Sarah to give us a kickoff for it.
So sorry. Robert Benecki is going to kind of review this item with you all. There were sections of this in that chapter, but we wanted to pull out the separate motions related to the joint city-county resolution related to the local emergency planning management board, if I've got that acronym right. And so Robert will kind of review these parts of the changes with you.
Good evening, Robert Benecki, Director of Douglas County Emergency Management. And thank you, Sarah, for kicking that off. But what you just approved, the county code, the Articles 4 and 5 related directly to LDCFM, Articles 1, 2, and 3 directly relate to our Department of Emergency Management. And what it did was clearly identify our department in accordance with Kansas administrative standards or regulations. So that's clearly identified. The second part was establish this board that we're talking about, and it's the Emergency Management Board / Local Emergency Planning Committee. So that's the function of that board. And the third thing was hazardous materials recovery. So if there's a spill or there's an incident, a release, the county can, any of that mitigation costs, the county can recoup that money. So those are the first three articles of that code that you just approved. And I really appreciate that. Code has been around for a long time and it really needed to be changed. So because that code changed, we'll get into this next item is we needed to update the resolution with the joint city counties resolution, and we needed to update the bylaws for this board that we're talking about. So The Joint Cities County Resolution, I'm sure you guys have had a chance to read it. I'm not sure if you've read the older versions, but the last time this joint resolution was updated was in 2015. And we've been operating under that resolution for this period of time. This resolution identifies, basically it says that we're going to create this board that's going to have these two major functions that I just talked about, and it's going to be countywide. So countywide to include all the cities in the county. So what that does is allows us to be the emergency management department, basically, for the city of Lawrence, for the city of Eudora, Baldwin City, and Lecompton. So those city commissions, if this is approved tonight, tomorrow we will send off this resolution to those cities, those commissions, and ask that they review it and hopefully approve that, which is saying that, yes, we agree to this board and we agree to the work that emergency management does in our community, and we're okay with that. So that's what will happen if this is approved tonight. So a couple things about the code and the resolution, as well as the bylaws, is that over the years, as Sarah said, they were pieced out and updated and revised. There was so much duplication. So if you read the current county code, if you go to the website, you're going to see that the complete board, every single member listed out and their term. You're going to see the director's job description, basically, position description, all listed in the code. None of it's necessary, and the attorneys agree. So that has been removed. The resolution did the same thing. The resolution listed not necessarily the board at the time, but it did, it did the board, but not necessarily the position. But and then the bylaws have continued to be updated pretty frequently because that board meets quarterly. Executive team meets every month. So so the resolution has been updated now to reflect the code, the current code that you just approved. And then the bylaws that we're asking for you to approve tonight basically is the version that you've seen is really close to what the board approved last year. Every year that board reviews those bylaws in accordance with the bylaws and makes adjustments and changes as necessary. So last summer, that board, knowing that these changes were coming, adopted basically the language that was so detailed in the code and the resolution, took that detail and put it in the bylaws. So that's kind of an explanation of how we got to where we are today. This is a huge cleanup for us. It streamlines it. It makes it so that, as Sarah mentioned, every time there's a change, we don't have to come back here and change code. We don't have to change resolution. The body that you've approved and said, hey, this board, we trust this board, that board can make those changes. And anything that's significant to bring back here, obviously will come back here. So I'll stop there and leave it for any questions.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Robert? All right. This is a public hearing item. Is there any member of the public who would like to give public comment on this? And seeing no one here in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online? Thank you. Closing public comment, bring it back to the commission. I would make one comment, and it's just I like the breadth of who is involved in the board and the appointments by the various school districts. And I know we've captured the vast majority of county area with the 4 major school districts, but just I think any of the county appointees and the health department appointees and such will all have to kind of keep in mind that there are school districts that outside of those large 4 that also need to, like those areas, even if they don't fall under those school districts, still have, school children that are Douglas County residents that will have to be front and center also. But I always say that. I always flag that and make sure that we know that we have nine school districts represented in Douglas County. Other comments, thoughts? Let's see, Jean, you're unmuted. Do you have anything? Okay, in which case I would entertain a motion.
This is Commissioner Reed. I move to approve the updated emergency management joint cities county resolution number 25-05, and the proposed Douglas County Emergency Management Board bylaws.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. And opposed? Motion passes. Thank you for being here. That brings us to a legislative update from Little Government Relations. I don't see anyone in the room. Do we have Mallory or Stewart online?
Yep, Commissioners, I moved Stuart Little into the panel. Oh, it's Mallory.
Yes, sorry. The user on our Zoom account goes back and forth. So it is me. It is in fact Mallory and not Stuart. All right.
Mallory, are you going to share screen or you want me to put up the PowerPoint?
Is it easy for you to pull it up, Jill?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I assume everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the time tonight. I know it's been a very long meeting for you all, so I will try to be brief, but also give you what you need to know. And I look forward to hopefully being in person for the next commission meeting and getting to see all of the updates and also getting to see all 5 of you. So I did get to meet Commissioner Dorsey last Friday, but I look forward to meeting you, Commissioner Anderson, hopefully sometime soon. So I will begin, kind of give a brief overview of the session. We're 3 days in. In some ways it feels like 30, but they are getting off to quite a fast start. The governor just finished up her State of the State address a few moments ago, and she will unveil her budget in the morning. So things are progressing very quickly, and we'll probably move faster than usual. And I know it feels like we say that every year, but this year in particular, the legislature does intend to adhere to a true 90-day session. So in the past, you might have recalled that they sometimes will go beyond that and beyond 100 days or 110 days, but legislative leadership is very interested in holding to the strict statutory 90 days. And so for us, that means a few things. The calendar of dates, for example, when bills can be introduced and when bills have to move out of committee and get to the other chamber, all of that is going to happen a lot faster this year. Turnaround, which is what we refer to as the midpoint of the session, that will happen on February 20th this year, which is a bit earlier, particularly for a session where the second Monday fell rather late in January. So really, we're only about 5 weeks away from the midpoint of session. And then actually first adjournment will take place in March, which again is also very early. Normally first adjournment usually is, first week of April. And then customarily, the legislature will take a 3-week spring break, which is always appreciated not only for legislators, but everybody else in the building. They are not going to do that this year. They will instead only take about a week or 10 days off, and then they will come back for a set veto session. So in the past, they don't normally constrict veto session to a set number of days, but this year they are. And so veto session, we already know, will be set for April 10th, 11th, and 12th, and then they will be gone. So in addition to that new kind of schedule and timeline, the legislature this year also is using a new or intends to use a new budget process. And so in the past, of course, the governor first week of session releases her budget, and in the weeks following, the state agencies then come in and talk about what their enhancements are going to be. This year, the legislature decided, as some other states, a handful of other states do, a legislature-initiated budget. And so they kind of, tell the governor, well, you can have what you want, but we're going to assemble and put our own budget together. And the legislature, a special committee, has been doing the prep work for all of that late this fall and before session began. And so they have laid the groundwork to do their own budget, which was introduced on the very first day of the session. And some budgets are actually have already been heard and will be reported out actually by the end of this week. So on some of those smaller state agencies, which has never happened before. So some of the larger state agencies, those intend to be heard and finished up by late January, and I think the budget intends to pass the House in early to mid-February, so which is quite a bit earlier than anticipated. For a lot of people, that means that today, actually, it was announced that state agencies are being asked by the legislature to find or cut about 7.5% of their budgets and look for ways to save. So coming into a session being asked to reduce your budget and not consider enhancements, that's a little bit different than what we have been used to in the last few years, where the state's economic outlook and budget outlook has been good. So that will certainly set the tone as we head into budget negotiations. Go to the next slide. Yes. So this is probably a bit of old news, but just wanted to make sure this is kind of in the back of everyone's heads. Of course, with the election in November, we now have kind of a super majority is what some people are referring to it as. So of course, Republicans have 88 members now in the House and 31 in the Senate. What that means in terms of thinking about the governor's veto power is it is significantly diminished than it was before. So you need 84 votes in the House to override a governor's veto and 27 in the Senate. So they have more than enough to do that. And so on some of the issues that we have talked about in the past, if you think about government competition, which is something that has come very close to passing. It has passed by very narrow margins, and the governor has vetoed it. Well, now something like that has much more ability to pass. We have a little bit of new legislative leadership on the Senate side, new Senate Vice President and a new Majority Leader, and the House Speaker and Majority Leader stayed the same. We have a new Minority Leader, so there'll be some changes there in leadership dynamics. And then in our December report, I just would remind you, we did include the membership of some of the most pertinent committees that we deal with, so that is at your fingertips. Some of the specific issues and really specific for local governments, we'll talk about here on this slide. So, of course, taxes remain the most talked about issue for this session. Already tomorrow, we're getting started in the Senate Tax Committee with a hearing on a constitutional amendment that would cap property tax valuations. It would limit annual property value increases by 3% beginning next January 1 of 2026. This constitutional amendment does provide some exceptions for improvements that are made to the property. If there are property classification changes or the tax exemption status changes, there's a couple of exemptions in there. And so that will be heard tomorrow in Senate Tax. I know that the Kansas Association of Counties is going to be neutral on this issue because, as some of you probably know, different counties feel differently about this issue, which is a bit fascinating as I am talking to more and more colleagues. So again, this is very early on in the session. This is by no means going to be the last proposal you're going to see about property taxes. And some might be constitutional amendments, some might be just regular old bills. The thing to keep in mind with a constitutional amendment is that it does require 2/3 passage of both the House and the Senate. Again, if you'll recall from last year, a similar proposal that would have capped valuations at 4%, that really was pretty controversial on both sides. So I don't necessarily see that this will sail through the process necessarily, and I think we'll have a little bit better idea how things shake out tomorrow in the Senate hearing. You might recall also toward the end of the last session, another constitutional amendment that I think might have been a bit more popular, and had there been a bit more time, it might have progressed, but an alternative proposal that would have determined valuations of residential property based on the average fair market value of the 10 prior years. So using more of a rolling average instead of just a set cap. So that's kind of on the property tax front. Of course, government competition, we have been told will definitely be back on the table. So we expect to have those hearings again in the House and Senate tax committees. And then a whole host of local control issues that I think is probably are a surprise to no one, ranging from plastic bags to a host of elections bills, all the bills related to drop boxes and when you have ballots, when ballots must be turned in by. So we'll have lots of things to watch in the elections committee. I'll pivot a little bit. I don't know, is this fully got on here, but coming out of the interim housing committee back in December, there are going to be a lot of various issues talked about in terms of housing and codes and local zoning authority. And so I'll talk just about a few of those. First of all, the city of Topeka is going to bring legislation that I think is of interest to several other municipalities around the state, allowing cities to require mandatory inspections for landlords that accept public funds. And so we will be keeping an eye on that. There were also some other proposals that had more to do with zoning and local control. And so I think we're probably going to see some model legislation that has come out in other states related to form-based codes, fast track permitting, and see, the welfare reform committee also has been tackling some of these housing and unsheltered individuals, legislation pertaining to that. And so there was legislation last year that really would have penalized unsheltered individuals and also made it very difficult for local governments to enforce their own ordinances related to homelessness. So we are quite sure that those bills will be back, and we will certainly be keeping an eye on those. Lastly, another proposal that came out of the interim housing committee that does actually seem to have a bit of bipartisan support pertains to the sealing of eviction records. And so part of that, and we haven't seen, I don't believe the bill has been introduced, but a component of that does allow the tenant to expunge the record after 2 years. So the Kansas Housing Network, Advocates Network, has been working closely on that. And so that will be something else that we keep an eye on. 2 other quick topics I would mention, and then I'm happy to answer questions. Sorry, I know this was a lot of information to throw at you. CAPERS, you've heard us talk about this for several years now. I think everybody thought, well, maybe last year would have been the year that they had a serious conversation about let's move back to CAPERS 2, which I think most people seem to think that is much more favorable and competitive. Also does, of course, come with a bit of a hefty price tag. So we will see if 2025 perhaps is the year where we see some type of CAPERS reform. I believe the League of Municipalities intends to bring legislation that would take all municipal employees back to CAPERS 2. And I'm sure a host of other groups would love to also be included in that legislation. So we'll see about that. And then lastly, I know the county treasurers have for years been working on or have been talking about and working on proposals to update the motor vehicle fee structure, which I have been told hasn't changed in 30 years. So that will be something that I think several counties and the County Treasurers Association intends to work on again. So that's kind of all I had. I'm sure I forgot something important, but I hope somebody has some questions.
Thank you, Mallory. It is a lot, and it will continue to be a lot for the next 90 days or 87, I guess, that we have left. We really appreciate you being on it. I'll start with commissioners if you have any questions for Mallory.
Fine.
And not a lot from me. I would just mention you touched on the valuation cap conversation that may happen tomorrow. Is Douglas County weighing in for that, or some of our similar counties, are they having a say for it?
Yes, I do believe that your county appraiser has submitted opposition testimony and laid out really some extensive points about what this means, not only for the county and kind of the increased administrative burden, but really also what it means for the state. I actually was talking to the Kansas Association of Counties today, and I don't necessarily envy being in their position because I know that they're juggling, like I said, a whole host of opinions from counties on this issue. So I know some, I'm in Shawnee County. I know some neighboring counties feel different about it than Douglas County does. So I think this will be one of those issues where it's really important for the individual counties to really weigh in, because I know that the associations on issues like this have to kind of toe that neutral line. So this is definitely one of those issues where I think it is beneficial for our local Douglas County delegation to hear from you all on what this means for the county.
Yes, thank you. And I'm glad that the appraisers weighing in on that, so that touches him most directly, but that staff burden part of it, I hope is something that is, heard by the state. Commissioners, any other questions for Mallory?
Gene Dorsey here. I just have a question. Has anybody ever thought about archaic laws that are in the Constitution that sometimes don't make sense anymore?
Well, that's a very broad question. I know last year, for example, there was legislation that would restrict racial covenants. I mean, that was still something that was on the books in Kansas. And of course, that's not something that you would think people are adhering to, but so things like that haven't been touched for decades. I'm not sure if you ask that question to sitting lawmakers, your answer would probably be, well, once we're done building the budget and making sure we have fully funded schools and X, Y, and Z, then we might look at those things. But certainly, I know that there are places where improvements could be made when it comes to old and outdated statutes.
This is for information purposes only, so we won't take a vote, but I will open it up for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment on our legislative agenda? And seeing no one in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone with a hand raised online? All right, thank you. Again, this is information only, so we won't take a vote on this. Is any final comments before we move on to our next agenda item? Okay, thank you all, and thank you, Mallory, for being here.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is an executive session, and I will go ahead and make the motion for that. And that is that I move we enter an executive session for consultation with our attorney, Terrell Mock, for purposes of engaging in a discussion deemed privileged by the attorney-client relationship regarding a pending litigation brought by the Grant Township and others against the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County for 30 minutes. Sean Peterson, Deputy County Administrator, will also be in attendance. And Sarah, I don't see your name on here. And also Sarah Plinsky will also be in attendance. And that would put us back in the room. We have 30 minutes for, let's do 8:20. And then we will reconvene here in the commission room. So that was my motion. Do I have a second for that?
I second it.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. We are recessed for until 8:20. Session at 8:35. Thank you. Hello, we'll need another additional 10 minutes, so we will return to the meeting at 8:45. Thank you. Hello, welcome back. Thank you, everyone. Take a minute to pull up my agenda again. We're back from executive session. Of course, there are no votes and no actions taken from that time. That concludes our regular agenda and moves us to appointments. Commissioners, do we have any appointments that we're making this evening?
Karen, you got my resignation email, didn't you?
Well, you've only just gotten here, Gene.
What?
So you've only just gotten here.
No, for the Bert Nash.
Yes, thank you. So just for clarification, Commissioner Dorsey did send a letter to the chairs of the city and the county commissions about his resignation from the Burt Nash Board. So thank you. I did receive that. So that is actually one position that will be open and available for our appointment shortly. I don't know if we're ready to move on that tonight or not. We do have another opening that's been open for some time. So commissioners, we've had 2 applicants for that position, knowing that we would also soon have an additional position on the Burt Nash Board. One of those positions is a county appointee, and the other, which Commissioner Dorsey had just vacated, is a city-county appointee. So that actually has to go through both bodies, and I don't know that I have not yet communicated with the city, and I'm not sure what the process is for some of those joint appointments. But I have met with both of the people actually met both of them, but I'm happy to move forward with an appointment for the county position if commissioners are ready. I know we've sat on this for a while, but we also now have 2 new additional commissioners who may want to have some say in that.
This is Commissioner Reed. I would be happy to hear your motion if you feel ready to move forward. I will just note for the record that I have not been the best at communication related to this, and so I dropped that communication ball and have not been in touch with both of them. However, there's by no means a requirement that all commissioners speak to all applicants for different roles, so I'd be glad to entertain a motion if there aren't objections from other commissioners.
Well, that would mean I would need to pull up the correct names. I did also speak with Patrick Schmitz, with CEO of Burt Nash, about, was there a preference of order of operations? I think both names are great. I would probably put forward, and this was also his request too, and I'm fine with it, which is Ron Schneider for the current opening, the current county opening, and then Irit.
Galith, I think is how you say it. Galith.
Galith, thank you. Was his suggestion for the city-county appointee, which I think we would hold off on until we'd have a conversation with the city, if that sounds right to you.
Yeah, I'd like to, for that, if I would like to share that letter of interest, and they actually have to apply on the city's website as well.
Okay.
So on the city-county appointee.
Okay, and I'm happy to communicate back with Irit and help through that process then, because I know I've been sad that we've sat on that appointment for some time. So commissioners, if you're ready for me to make a motion for that, I will. No objections. Okay. I move to appoint Ron Schneider to the Burt Nash Board as a county appointee.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any conversation? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm just going to abstain on that.
Okay. All right, we have 4 yeas and 1 abstention, so motion passes. So thank you all for that. I have some other Fair Board appointments that are in the works, but they are not ready yet. So I guess it'd be one Fair Board. Commissioners, any other appointments for this evening?
I think that's all we have right
now. Thank you. That brings us to Commissioner and staff miscellaneous. And Sarah, if you would kick us off with your report.
Thanks, commissioners. Uploaded to the website just today. So that's the practices for my weekly memo to get uploaded on Wednesday of the meeting. It's kind of a long memo with a lot of things going on in it because you haven't gotten a memo in a few weeks. There's behavioral health court graduation tomorrow. The KC, Kansas Association of Counties, and the League of Kansas Municipalities are hosting Local Government Day next Wednesday, January 22nd. So if you want to attend, let us know. We can help get you registered. The Lawrence Economic Outlook Conference is Monday, January 27th. If you want to attend, RSVP, let us know. And then attached to this is, couple of different updates. I'm going to jump around in terms of the order of these. The property tax rebate pilot program that the commissioners approved last year, we did a press release. It is open. So that is in your packet and we're trying to get the word out on it. And then there were 2 sort of updates that I wanted to call to your attention that are in this packet. The first of which is that the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, and that is a county program for rent and utility assistance for county residents, had a 35% overall reduction for 2025 because it had a 61% reduction in the funding it received from the city of Lawrence through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We have attached some information to the memo that outlines the usage and how much of those funds go to residents in Lawrence. And I believe that's attached. If not, we can get you additional information, and also how much of that money goes to the city of Lawrence for their water, wastewater, and solid waste. So if that's something you'd like to have Gabby come and give you a little more detail on, we could put that on an upcoming agenda. So let me know. And then also there's an updated letter from Lawrence Douglas County Public Health and Heartland Community Health Center regarding the transition of Title 10, which are family planning services program. And that's something the commission had talked about a couple years ago when that service went to Heartland Health. Now it's going to transition back to public health. And so that communication is in your packet. That is also something we could have Heartland Health and Lawrence Douglas County Public Health come and talk to you about, because we've had some commission conversation about in the past. So just let me know your preferences there. You've got a work session we've expanded the upcoming work session and agenda items section of this memo. We're beginning to fill up your calendar for 4 o'clock work sessions related to just some overall department overviews. So those are showing up on our planning agenda. So I would plan that you're going to be coming in at 4 quite a bit for the next couple weeks. And then some additional agenda items that I just ask commissioners and the public or media that are listening to this, these things change. The minute I put it on paper, it's going to change. I can just guarantee it. So just please give us some flexibility that these are potential upcoming dates for work sessions and agenda items. And commissioners, that's all I have to share with you tonight.
So Sarah, you mentioned back to the Housing Stabilization Collaborative and that decrease in funding that came through the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, which has been a fairly stable funder for the years that this has been a fund that we've managed. I know the largest amount is paid back out to the city of Lawrence for their utilities, so that they have very pretty strict rules about shutting off people's water and such. So did that number by any chance get captured in here? I'm just looking through the notes real quickly. In terms of
how much funds go back to the city of Lawrence?
Correct.
I am not sure it's in this report from Jill. We can certainly get that for you. I know we've been able to get it for you in the past. So let me, if it's not, I don't think it's in here, but we can get that and get it back to you.
I think that would be a good thing for us to have as information. And I think there may be opportunity for conversations with city commissioners, because Affordable Housing Advisory Board is one way that they can fund that program. They can certainly fund it out of their general budget. I just think we need to have the discussion about, I did see in here, it's 84% of the funds are used back for Lawrence residents. And a large portion of that goes specifically to the city of Lawrence. So I just want to make sure that they are fully aware of the consequences of defunding that program.
Thank you, Commissioner Riley. I would just add, this is Commissioner Reed. I just want to add that I certainly, in addition to, it would be great to see the current data about amount paid to the city in terms of the water utility, but also the number that you just highlighted being an important point of discussion too, that the vast majority of those served by the HSC funds are Lawrence residents specifically compared to the other parts of our county. And so I do think that having some sort of supplementary data specific to that and the breakdown of community members residing in Lawrence, especially since there is now an expansion of the affordable housing sales tax that voters just passed, as well as a relatively newly adopted joint city-county plan related to housing and homelessness prevention. So I do think that I would like to have a deeper discussion here as a commission and think about how to, starting with Gabby perhaps and really getting a deeper dive on some of that, and then thinking through as a body how we want to address that with our partners at the city and what kind of requests we might want them to consider related to that.
It's a program that I've been very proud of. I think a lot of us have been very proud of in terms of this is homelessness prevention. This is the cheapest dollars to spend on homelessness and unhoused folks, is to make sure that they don't become unhoused in the first place. It's really powerful. It's really important. I just want to make sure that all of our partners are at the table for it. So. Any other comments about that? Scheduling wise, there are, I think, 2 upcoming county sessions about the land protection program, and the one that's going to be at Lone Star tomorrow, I'm going to try and attend. So I didn't know if there were any other commissioners that were going to try and make it to. There's that one, and then there's one at the library, which actually I think is occurring right now. So we probably won't be at that one. So we can notice that if anybody else is planning to be there.
This Commissioner Reed, there's a potential that I will be there, but depending on scheduling conflicts. So thank you for bringing it up so that Robin could notice it for us.
That's all I have. Any other, check my notes, any other Commissioner miscellaneous?
I signed up for a economic breakfast or lunch. I forget which it is. Over at Artera, and you remember the date?
That's the Economic Outlook conference that's in the packet. So if additional commissioners want to come, we'll make sure it gets noticed too as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm also signed up to go to that.
Right.
But my understanding is if it's referenced in the packet, then we're covered in case others want to show up. That's all I have. If there's nothing else, then we are adjourned, and thank you very much. Oh, did you have something?
And then Jean and I will be at a county commission orientation training tomorrow.
Yeah. The 2 new commissioners are going to go to the Kansas Association of Counties' new commissioner orientation program tomorrow.
Excellent. And I believe you're going with them. Is that right?
I am. Yeah.
Good for you.
Commissioner Lee, I do have one more miscellaneous thing, circling back to the appointments portion. I just wanted to highlight for all commissioners here and anybody who might still be hanging on and listening in the public that we have recently opened up applications for the community member positions on the CJCC. Last year, we went through a bylaw revision, and so these are newly defined positions with a new online form for folks to submit. And I believe we've got 2 weeks left of that open deadline. I'm not sure how many applications we've received yet, but please, if there's anybody in the community that might have an interest that has had some sort of experience or impact with the criminal justice system, encourage them to apply. It's a very short form application, and I believe we set February 1st as the deadline for that. So hoping to be able to make an appointment early in the year so we get community representation back on the board.
Right. Anything further? Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all for the evening.